Hello and welcome to Metro Home Theater Tech Tips. I'm Brent McCall.
I'm Adam Rogers.
Welcome aboard. So tell us about today's show, Adam.
Well, today's a special day for us today. We get to break out the toys.
I see that. You brought lots of good things with you today. Lots of visual aids and something for me to play with, being the biggest kid in the block here.
Exactly. So today we're going to be talking specifically about bandwidth and what it means, what it is, how it works, and the intricacies of everything that is considered when you deal with bandwidth and making sure that you get data from one side of something over to the other side of something. That means anywhere from a source to a display, or from a wireless access point to a device. Any kind of bandwidth when you have to transfer any kind of data.
So we have networking bandwidth, HDMI bandwidth.
Exactly.
Personal bandwidth.
Yep, because everybody's got their own bandwidth ability, what they can handle, right?
Absolutely.
And I know that everybody right now is still pretty heavy on their personal bandwidth right now. So everybody stay safe out there.
Okay, so let's get going because there's a lot to cover today, and
yeah.
I want to play with the toys.
Yeah, exactly. So what we've done today, and I'll go ahead and actually bring us over to a shot of what we've done today. We'll go over here to number 4. So what we have today, everybody, is we've got our bandwidth cards. These are going to be showing us everything that's for the bandwidth, about the different abilities of bandwidth. This is what we're going to be using as our examples of that. And you'll notice that Brent has been very kind to us and has set us up in an RGB fashion. So you can actually, there you go, get a top-down shot of that. So we've got our green, blue, and red, well, almost red, kind of an orange. And we've got our clock down here when we're talking about bandwidth on HDMI cables. So all that to say, we are going to go ahead and jump right into talking about different bandwidths and requirements in different areas. And what I'd like to do first is I'd like to go ahead and discuss the different cabling that we have to work with and their bandwidth abilities. Okay. So I got my handy list here. So right out of the gate, what we want to talk about is networking bandwidth. Because with Cat 5, Cat 6, and Cat 6A, the bandwidth requirements and bandwidth abilities of those cables are nowhere near the bandwidth abilities of something like, say, a fiber cable or an HDMI cable or something like that. So we really want to talk about that and get that out of the way. So with Cat 5, you really are looking at about, truthfully, a 1 gig. You can go a little bit higher than 1 gig on a Cat 5, and at super short lengths, you can go much higher than that. And you'll notice the key point of that is the length of the cable. So technically, their specifications call for a 1 gig at a certain length. So, but if you go much shorter than that, you can get away with that. Definitely do some research online to find out how far you're needing to go with it and how much bandwidth you need for that.
And when you're thinking of bandwidth in that way, think about carrying a heavy weight on your shoulders.
Exactly.
You're not going to go very far before you're tired and want to sit down.
Right.
The stronger you are, the further you can go with the weight.
Yeah, think about the gauge of a wire being the strength of that wire. You know, how much weight can that gauge of wire carry, which would mean, you know, a Cat 5 cable, which is much thinner than a Cat 6 cable, won't be able to carry the same weight of something the same distance as a Cat 6 or a Cat 6A, and the non-ends of like the fiber distances as well. So with Cat 6, we're only looking at about 10, or we're looking at 10 gigabits per second.
Which is really pretty good considering the gauge of the wire and how little there is of it.
Well, and even still, the biggest thing with the 10 gigs is you need to make sure that it's basically a perfect connection. This is inside of a lab. This is not real world. This is not something where they've, you know, put this in somebody's house and they're getting 10 gigs. In some cases, yeah, they'll get 10 gigs, but again, it's in a lab or when they really put a lot of effort into making sure in a super short distance. So with Cat 6A, of course, you'll be able to go to that 10 gig distance at a much, or pardon me, the 10 gig bandwidth at a much longer distance. It's much stronger. It has more
more copper, more twist.
Yeah, more twist to it, so it actually can go further distances than that.
And talk about that real quick. When you're looking, it's not just gauge, it's how many twists. The higher the twist ratio, the less resistance is as you're moving.
Right.
And think about it like this. You're carrying that heavy weight on your shoulder and you're walking along and the ground's flat. If we raise that ground level up so you're walking uphill, the resistance becomes much greater. You're going to go a much shorter distance before you give out. And it's the same thing with twist ratios. The higher the twist ratio, the flatter the surface becomes and the easier it is to carry the load.
Right, exactly. So it's something that you need to keep in mind also, that when you need to go further distances, we need to get rid of that radiation and spend a little bit more money on it. Now, of course, the furthest that you can, well, not the furthest, pardon me, but the next jump from the Cat 5, Cat 6, and Cat 5e, Cat 6, and Cat 6a, we really jump up into the fiber.
Yes, because Cat 7's really only for short runs inside of a server environment.
Right. So with an OM3 fiber cable, which is what we sell, you are going to get 40 gigabits per second bandwidth down one strand of Cat5 multimode, or sorry, OM3 multimode fiber over a distance of 100 meters. That's where that distance is going to come into play. If you need to go extra long distances and get a much higher bandwidth capabilities, that's when you need to jump into a fiber cable. So
now, for those of us who speak English, 100 meters is
328 feet. Did I get that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, 328 feet here in the Imperial, United States for that. So anyone else in the rest of the world, you're looking at about 100 meters for that. So with that out of the way, what I'd like to do is, Brent, let's talk about what is bandwidth.
Yes, and this is something you and I have discussed quite a bit.
Yes.
Because it plays not just into HDMI, but on pretty much everything we look at, whether it's serial connections, IP connections, video connections, audio connections, or how much crap you can cram in your Jeep.
Right. Yeah, it has to do with a lot of that. I mean,
The load on your tires.
Exactly. The amount of bandwidth that you have and how quickly you can go in a car, so to speak. So, which we'll get to that as well here. I'm very excited about this. I was very happy to put this together.
He's been planning this for weeks.
I have. So anyway, so all that to say,
and he's got the good color markers down there too.
I do have the good color markers. Yeah, I give you the weird colors
I see
over
that.
there. So, but we'll talk about that later. Anyways, so Brent, let's talk about bandwidth and how it pertains to HDMI. We of course our bread and butter comes from the HDMI world, and so it's very easy for us to talk about bandwidth on the HDMI world. So let's start there, and then we can kind of correlate that to how bandwidth works in other areas.
Can you give me the overhead, young man?
I sure can.
When we are looking at bandwidth, the first thing I typically think about, honestly, is a road, a highway. In this case, the bandwidth superhighway.
Right? You like that?
Not the information highway,
Nope.
but the bandwidth superhighway.
Exactly.
So each of these represents a lane. Now, the key to each of these is how much weight that lane can carry. So we're going to start with our current standard, which is 6 gigabits per channel under HDMI 2.0, pick an alpha character.
Right.
So it's 6 gigabits per channel. Now, we're going to assume this is weight. And here's why this is important. Because when you're looking at data traveling down that, and you notice I left this one blank.
I did. And we'll talk about why here in just a minute, won't we?
When you look at traffic traveling down this, your picture, your sound, whatever's going on your TV,
right?
The data is all traveling at exactly the same speed. Now, Adam was kind enough to put the equivalent speed in miles per hour of electrons at the bottom of the whiteboard,
so what
which is 616,629 miles an hour an electron travels on average down a piece of copper.
Now, with the reason you say average, and this is very important, this is actually coming into play with the design of cables and stuff. You and I have talked about this very often, about the quality of an HDMI cable, the purity of the copper. It's very important to discuss that because this is an average speed. This is the equivalency speed of an electron through a copper medium. However, it comes down to the purity of that copper. If you have a super pure copper cable or super pure copper medium, then it's going to travel slightly faster. If you have one that's not so pure, that has some imperfections inside of it or some weird
other metals
that get mixed into it as well, it's going to slow that down because it can't travel as quickly. So
and
with
the
that
same
in
thing
mind,
with fiber.
Exactly.
The purity of the fiber will affect this.
Yes, it does. And so in this case, it's very darn close to the speed of light. However, it's not quite at the speed of light. So we're splitting hairs or quantum hairs really at that speed. However, it's very important to understand that at that level, when you're transmitting the amount of bandwidth that we're talking about today, when you have any slight imperfections in that copper cable, even from strand to strand, let's talk about HDMI in here. When you go from one copper strand in an HDMI cable to another copper strand, I was going to say, you want to switch that over for that? By the time that piece gets over from the source device over to the display, you're going to wind up at different times. And so what you're going to wind up with is this red connection here, which again, when you're talking about HDMI, we've talked about this again, it is digital, however, it's not digital. It's
digital either works or
it's RGB in effect is what's happening. So what's going to happen in this case, you're going to wind up getting pixelation, or you're going to wind up getting red pixels across your screen because this one's red sparkles. You're not going to get in there in time for that. And this is very important when we're talking about bandwidth because, again, bandwidth is just the amount of information that we can take from one side to the other in a certain amount of time. And so if
the word of bandwidth has been misconstrued dramatically.
Right.
People don't really understand it. And an analogy I was given Adam earlier is voltage and current.
Right.
Bandwidth, the road, these lanes, is voltage. And we're going to assume it's 110 volts to make our life easy for this discussion.
Sure.
So every one of these is 110 volts. Now, different devices pull a different amount of current down that voltage. So these are already 110 volts.
Okay.
We're not going to change that. You know, there's minor variances. It could go as low as 96 or as high as 130, but we're going to say 110 volts.
Right.
But on lane number 1, D0 in this case, we got a refrigerator kicking on.
Yep.
It's going to draw some serious current.
Yeah.
On lane number 2, we've got an LED light bulb.
Yeah.
It's not doing nothing.
Yeah, not pulling a whole lot of anything.
No, on lane 3, maybe you're watching a TV.
Sure.
So even though the lanes are all 110 volts, the data, the amount of data or current being drawn down that lane varies dramatically. Now, the exact same thing is true in the world of HDMI.
Right.
One of the nice things when you're looking at the better TVs or the better players like the Oppo,
Right.
if you look in the upper right-hand corner in most cases, it will show you the actual bandwidth that is getting to the television, how much data is being transferred.
Right.
And you'll watch that go up and down quite dramatically. The most popular scene we talk about is always Billy Lynn's
Long halftime walk.
Long halftime walk.
Again, great demo movie, terrible movie to sit down and watch.
Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah, anyways.
But when you're watching a couple of the scenes, particularly the one where they're sitting under the tree,
Yep.
with the blue sky in the background and the sand in the tree, the data transfer, even though it's 4K, HDR, 60 frames a second,
Yeah.
is still
Relatively low.
relatively low because there's very much of same as, same as, same as, same as.
So with this space here that we're showing here, this is just 1 pixel. Let's just say this is 1 pixel on that 4K screen. So when you're looking at the blues, let's say this is one of the pixels that's in the blue sky up in the top area, you're going to see this here because the first pixel is here because it sent a lot of color
To establish the shot.
To establish the shot. And then after that, it says same as, same as, same as, same as. So all your data requirements are now down here at that point there. So, or maybe something like that. So what that's going to do is it's going to allow the bandwidth requirements for that 1 pixel. Again, this is 1 pixel for 1 section of the
Out
screen.
of the 4K by 2K, 1 pixel.
In 1 frame or one bit
Grouping
of
of
information.
frames.
Yeah, 1 grouping of frames or 1 bit of information in that area. So it doesn't need to update, which means we don't need as much bandwidth. So now let's say, of course, down in the area where they are sitting under the tree, where there's movement, things are changing, things are
Or
happening.
more importantly, the fireworks scene with all the LED lights and the stadium.
Exactly.
There's all sorts of crap going on there. So what you've got is the data pretty close to maxes out those channels.
Right.
And you're going to have things moving back and forth, and depending on the color mix and things like that.
Right.
So again, the roadway stays the same. The road is 6 gigabits per second capability.
Yes.
But the amount of usage on that road will vary depending on the scene.
Right.
And what makes this important is that your cables have got to support this all the time.
At the max. Because then at that point...
actually, that's the minimum.
Well, correct. Yeah, because at
Not
that
the
point...
max. You have to be able to support at a bare minimum to correctly display that picture.
Right.
Under load.
Yep.
6 gigabits per second. Even though most of the time, you're not at 6 gigabits, at points you will.
Right.
Now, for those of us that are old school analog guys, that used to have meters on the amps, it was not uncommon if you had a good amp and a good meter, you're wandering around half, quarter, maybe a watt, and it's reasonably loud. But when something happens, you can watch that meter go whang!
Yeah.
And that's bandwidth.
Right.
We have gone from very little need to a lot of need. And it's the exact same thing in video.
Right. So, and it's when using the amplifier as an example for it, that's that dynamic headroom, correct?
Yes.
Is that the best way to
Yes,
describe that?
and you've got to have it in video as well.
Right. And so making sure that you have the ability to have that out there is very important.
And that 6 gigabits, this is your dynamic headroom minimum.
Right.
not the maximum.
Right.
This is the minimum you have to be able to accomplish in order to send the signal correctly.
Right. So, we've talked about bandwidth when it comes to HDMI cable. We've talked about the different video, setups for RGB and well, we haven't touched on clock yet. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to jump over real quick. And you started talking about the, and actually real quick, everybody, thank you for checking in on the video today. It's great seeing everybody there. I think we've got a couple people. We've got Howlin' at the Moon. Great to see you. Thank you for coming in and
one of my favorite bars.
There you go, Howlin' at the Moon.
Howl at the Moon.
Howl
It's
at
a
the
piano bar.
Oh, okay. I've never.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And then of course we got Mr. Rainey here with us today.
Hello,
good
Jack.
to see you as well. So please, as always, guys, if you have any questions for what we're talking about today, please put them down in the chat below. We'll be happy to answer those questions throughout the video today. If it's about today's topic, great. If not, we're still happy to talk about that as well. And as always, a like and a subscribe is very helpful to us. It lets us know that we're doing the right thing for you for the different video topics. So we thank you and appreciate that. So
Yep. And don't forget, check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Yep, exactly. So now let's go ahead and move on. So with like I said, we talked about the bandwidth of an HDMI cable and everything else. Let's break this down just a little bit more. Let's talk about, you gave a great example early on, and I kind of want to have you talk more about that, is the weight. Let's pretend, let's talk about weight, okay? So let's say, for instance, our 6 gigabits per second capability, or let's go crazy. Let's go ahead and do an OM3 fiber.
Okay, so we're at 40 gig.
40 gigs, yep.
Okay.
So let's say it's a 40-ton capable road, right? So actually, let's compare this, all right? So we've got a, let's see, we'll go back over here to our top-down shot, and what we'll look at here. So let's say, for instance,
Well,
here.
now, when you're looking at 40 gig fiber, here are the questions you have to ask. How many transmitters are we getting to get 40 gig? Because it's not 40 gig per color. It's 40 gig currently combined.
Correct.
So how many channels?
So correct. So let's say, for instance, it's 40 gigs for the one channel, because we'll say we have one fiber cable. Okay. So we'll say here's our, here I'll use some different colors so we can differentiate what's going on. So what we'll do here, we'll say this is our fiber, and then we'll say that this one here is our Cat5e. All right. Let's go from one end of the spectrum to the other. Okay. And the reason that Brent is looking a little interesting about this is because I am actually springing this question on him.
We going to throw coax in there too?
Do you want to?
Let's throw coax in there
let's do
too.
Coax. Do you know the coax?
I got a pretty good guess.
All right, let's go ahead and put that in there.
You can get 3.5 gigs down it typically.
There we go. Okay, so
on a good coax, RG6.
So with this here, we'll go here to fiber. We'll say we've got 40 gigs, right? Mm-hmm. Now I'm not going to do 40 gigs. I'm going to do 40 tons, right? And so we'll do Cat5e, which is a 1-ton road, for instance, correct?
Yep, 1 gig.
And then you were saying that coax you can usually get
3.5
tons. Mm-hmm. 3.5 tons. Okay.
Don't forget an HDMI cable.
HDMI. We'll go ahead and make that blue.
Are we going to do a 2.0 cable?
Yeah, let's do a 2.0 because
so
of course
that's 18
2.1.
tons.
Yep. So that one's not quite there yet.
That
so
was
we'll
a
do
song.
18. Oh, was it?
18 tons.
18 tons. So there we are. We've got our different cabling and we've got our different weights, or capabilities of those weights. So now let's talk about when you are trying to get the information from one side of from one side. Let's say, for instance, our source side. We'll use that as the example. To our sink side.
Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to carry because this is very important.
Right.
We're going to carry milk.
Milk.
We're going to carry milk.
Okay, I'm following.
So what we have is a 40-ton tanker truck of milk.
Okay.
And we can carry it down this roadway, no problem. The road's capable of supporting it, no issues. Now, if I'm going to carry that same 40 tons down this road, what am I going to have to do?
You're going to have to break it up, aren't you?
I'm going to have to cut that weight down dramatically.
Right.
Now, how do you take weight out of milk?
You break it down into smaller portions.
No.
Or no?
You take the water out.
Okay, you condense it.
You condense it.
Okay.
So now we have, this is condensed milk. This is powdered milk.
Aha.
Are you following me?
I am, yes, sir. Yep.
So, this is milk straight out of the carton. It tastes awesome.
Yep.
This is real. It's got 2 weeks left on the expiration date. It's great milk.
Right.
Now, we're going to condense it a little bit.
Okay.
So we're going to take it down to this. You throw just a little bit of water back in it.
Sure.
And it once again becomes milk, or pretty close to it.
Right. Right.
You can taste a little bit, but you know what? I'll pour it on my cereal. It's
Won't
okay.
notice. Yeah, exactly.
Right. We get down to this.
Right.
what do we got to do?
Well, it becomes powdered at
It
that point.
becomes
You get rid
powder
of,
at that point.
it-
Now, have
super
you ever
compact.
put powdered milk into your cereal?
I can't say that I have.
Don't.
Don't. Okay.
And the same thing happens in your picture. Now, how do you make it become real again?
Okay.
You have to have one hell of a compressor and one hell of a regurgitator to put the water back in and mix it correctly.
Right.
So there's a lot of math involved in this. I mean, when you're making milk at home, you open the box and it says, okay, add 1 cup of water to 3 tablespoons of powdered
milk. Correct. Yeah.
And, well, it's kind of white.
It has a
But it
milk
isn't milk.
flavor, so
No,
you know.
sure.
Yeah, you know.
It's white.
It's close.
Now, if, however, you have a device that is both the encode and decode, meaning it knows exactly what it took out,
Sure.
and it knows exactly what to put back in,
Sure.
you can get, these two can be very, 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 very close.
Yes.
For example, and we talked about this morning, our brand new HD Base T extender,
Yes.
which has, without question, the best compression you and I have ever seen.
It really does. And
Because we compared it to fiber on this television on Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk.
Yeah.
And under an A-B comparison, we could not tell the difference.
it did very well. It really
So,
did.
in order to make this work correctly, you have to do a lot of math, which is why this is just better out of the gate.
Right.
Because you're not having to do anything.
Yeah, it doesn't. You don't have any kind of compression.
Right.
Everything's nice and steady. You can go all the way through with that, and you don't have to do anything
So it's
special
just,
with it.
it is just better.
Now, of course, the requirements of getting that same amount of milk from one side to the other is much greater. You need to have a much sturdier road. You need to have a
Yes.
much sturdier tractor, you know, to pull all that information across.
Absolutely.
And that's why you have, you know, that's where, one, the cost of it comes into play, but also that's where the abilities of it come into play. You need to make sure you get a high quality connection for it. You need to make sure you have high quality road all the way across. It's like driving on the Autobahn, which is a very high quality road at high speeds
You're
versus
safe.
versus driving through Kansas or
yeah.
something like that, where you've got potholes everywhere.
Who drives in Kansas?
Well, I did. I had to drive through it
Okay.
once or twice, and they have potholes. All that to say, actually, not as bad as some other states, but we won't go much further than that. Anyways, all that to say, it's like driving, you know, through from, if you don't have a good quality, you can't drive
Right.
that same bandwidth or that same, you know, amount of
Now,
information across that.
here's the really nice thing about all this. Let's assume this is our HDMI 2.0 signal, or
Right.
18 gig signal, this car.
Right.
Now, I'm going to take this yellow car, and I'm going to run him down the coax. And we've done this.
Okay.
We had, well, not under 4K, but under 1080p.
Yeah.
Our M3B system.
Yeah.
The picture was good, but it was not as good.
Right.
Now, HD Base T, because of the new math,
Yeah. The compression.
right, I can now make a little Miata be a really quick vehicle.
And I promise you, I looked for a Miata when we were doing this. I really wanted us to have a Miata because you just picked up a new Miata.
Yes, and
Congratulations.
thank you.
But
But-
I really did look for one, I promise.
So now we can now take this and bring it very close to this.
Right.
On the other hand, if we go here, not only can I carry this car, I can put this car and this car on there
Right.
because I have a lot more headroom. So there's a lot more capabilities to go forward.
Right.
Very excited about fiber.
Yeah, fiber is going to be great, and in fact, we already know it's great because we are using it currently in our. Well, we've used it now for quite a while in our AOC
Yes.
HDMI cables. That's AOC, which is active optical cables.
Cables.
Anyways, all that to say, fiber is really becoming the go-to for the higher bandwidth requirements of video, especially with HDMI.
And as we go forward into 2.1, which means we're going from 18 up to 48.
Right.
24, 30, and 48.
Right.
The demands become much bigger. Now, I'm going to go backwards a minute to our earlier drawing because
while you're doing that, go ahead and get that set up. Did I erase it before you were ready for
You
it?
did,
I did.
but-
That's okay. Let's see what we got going on here in the chat real quick. We've actually got John Krug. Krug or Krug? I apologize. Krug or Krug? Correct me in that. You're actually, you are right. It is sitting back here. We are working on it. Yeah, this is the gentleman who sent us this.
Yes.
And actually, this is a great time to talk about that because
Would you, while you're talking, would you give me D0 through
I
D3?
can do that. So when we run into problems every once in a while out in the field, of course, we are here for tech support first and primary because that's what our job is first and foremost. And so every once in a while we get a problem out in the field that we can't recreate here. And so luckily we work very closely with a lot of dealers in our areas, and we're happy to work with anybody who has that. John is actually a dealer for URC systems, and we had a small incompatibility with one of our switches.
Where it worked initially, and then second.
And something weird is going on. Yeah. So
and you're right.
Yeah, you are. By the way, you're right.
Next,
Something weird
by
is
the
going
way,
on.
Next up on testing is the
RTI.
Yeah,
and
then
we're gonna play
Control
around with
4 and
that.
Crestron, because we're going to track this down.
All that to say, guys, if you run into a problem and it's something major in your business, we want to work with you to find a solution for it. John was gracious enough to send us a URC system so we could test that, so thank you very much for that. Krug, thank you. So with that said, again, we want to work with you guys out in the field to make sure we get things working for you as best as possible with that. So
We also travel and work with other manufacturers. This coming Monday, I'll be down in South Florida with Sim2.
correct.
Thank you.
Now we also, Howlin' at the Moon, he actually says, we use this reference as background stagnant area and foreground movement area for our cameras. So this is also very important. We just had a discussion about this last week.
It's video surveillance.
For video surveillance, for recording time to maximize that. Because again, when you refer back, or same
Bandwidth is
as.
anything that takes up space.
Exactly. So even the same as is still bandwidth. However,
Just smaller.
Just smaller. Now, of course, like you're saying, a hard drive is bandwidth. You have to think about it that way because he's right. When you have to store that information, you're not just storing it. You're also pulling that information back out. It's how much information you can get in and get out of the system in a certain amount of time.
Right, and that's, it used to be we measured it by RPM on the drive.
Right.
Now it's read-write speeds on SSDs and USBs and...
Right. All right, so what do you have for me?
Well,
where are we at?
As we were discussing, if you'll give me the overhead, young man.
I sure will. We'll go over here.
This is what HDMI looks like. There are 4 high-speed channels in an HDMI cable.
Right.
Now, up until this point in time, it was green, blue, red, clock.
Or YCBCR clock.
Or PBPR.
PBPR? PBR?
PBR.
Well,
PBR.
we do that later on today, right?
Yeah, not as far as they know.
Oh, okay.
So, let's assume we're on an HDMI 2.0 application.
Right.
Again, we've got 6, 6, 6, and who the heck knows because nobody ever tested it.
Right.
Now, this is the problem as we go forward into 2.1 because there's a whole lot of cables out there with who the heck knows because nobody's ever tested it because HDMI didn't care to test it.
Right.
We, however, did care. Not because I'm that smart, but because we just didn't know we could cheat.
Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't know I could cheat.
Yep.
So when you look at our cables, they are all 6 gigabits. What this means is when you go into HDMI 2.1, we are already 4 equivalent channels ready to take you there now.
Right.
You don't have to go out and buy a special cable and say, ooh, I have a brand new. You don't need to. Take one of our VLOX passives, our MHX, our MHY, in fixed, depending on the length, you're set to go. Right now, we're at 6 gigabits. On anything that was rated at 18, we're 24 already.
Right.
So that bandwidth is there now.
Right. Okay.
So we already got the superhighway.
So we're already ready for
We're
that.
ready.
We've got a good strong. We've got our Autobahn set up correct.
Yes, we
already,
do.
don't we?
We built it. We may have built it for tanks, but you can drive a car down it.
You can. Yeah, that's true. And no, John, you're not crazy. So we'll talk here soon about that later on. But and actually, Howlin' at the Moon, that's a really great reference about that. I want to touch back on that again because you're right. When you're talking about something in the foreground or in the background, when something's, I talked about it last week when we had 2 different cameras, one that's facing a wall that's doing nothing, and one that's facing down the hallway that always has traffic going up and down that hallway. Let's use that as our example for bandwidth.
That is absolutely bandwidth because the one facing the wall,
nothing changes.
particularly if you have the motion detection set up and nothing's going on there, that camera's not taking up any space on your network or your drive.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, you got something going down the hallway, people, traffic, bodies moving back and forth.
Yep.
that traffic is going to be a whole lot higher, and that's bandwidth.
Right.
Again, bandwidth is anything that takes up space.
Another good example, and I'm going to run with this one as well. Follow me on this one if you would.
That scares me.
Let's say bandwidth is, and especially when we're talking about HDMI and video, and that refer back, or same as. Imagine you're back in high school. Okay.
That was a long time ago.
I was going to say, and I know that this was a long time ago. I know that dinosaurs were roaming the earth at the time for you. So it takes a little bit to.
You are referring
remember.
to large American cars, right?
Well, of course.
Of course.
I'm not. All that to say, when you're, let's say at just before class starts, everybody's out in the hallway, and there's a lot of people. Well, that's in the bathroom.
No, not then.
So I'm sorry, that was the volcano that was smoking. That's right. So anyways, moving on. All that to say, when you have a lot of people in the hallway, you can't move, or it's difficult, and the hallways are packed. They're moving through there. You have no more space for any extra people because everything's fully packed. Now, of course, depending on how many students were in your high school and yada, yada, yada. But the point is that now, when the bell rings and everybody filters into their classes, you have same as for the next 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
The halls are empty except for a couple people here and there that maybe are just moving from one place to or another. Those are, like, for instance, the different areas on the screen that are actually changing. Things are actually happening. But the students that are in the classes, those are the refer back or the same as, because nothing's changed for them. They're in the same seats and they haven't moved around. So
that's a heck of an analogy. I've never thought of that, but that's
right then and there.
The hallways are the perfect analogy because they can either handle a whole lot of people,
right,
and 5 minutes later, the administrator,
right,
and that's it.
Yeah,
that is the HDMI channel right there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So
four hallways.
In review, everything that we've talked about today, when it comes to bandwidth, the requirements of what's happening and what bandwidth actually is, comes down to how much information I need to get from point A to point B over a certain medium. So whether it be a Cat 5e, Cat 6, Cat 6a, Cat 7, fiber, HDMI, even sending, even talking about just actual electricity when we're talking about electricity to the home.
How much current, how big's your circuit breaker?
Exactly.
Is it 10 amp, 15, or 20 amps?
Exactly. The amount of current or amount of signal or amount of data as you're needing to go from point A to point B. Even something as simple as driving down the highway, which is what we've used as our example today, it shows you the amount of bandwidth and capability of what you have.
On that note, it is important to understand that when you see people talking about speed, high speed, standard speed, ultra high speed, it has nothing to do with how fast that car is moving.
Again,
that car is moving at this speed all the time.
Right.
What it has to do with is how many cars can get. Ooh, and that's why I got this little piece.
There you go.
It has entirely to do with how many cars can get from there to there in a given period of time. The more lanes of traffic you have, the more cars that can travel at a specific point in time.
Exactly.
Period.
Yep. So let's say, for instance, if I had enough room on this and we had 18 lanes on here, one lane per gig per se, then what that would do is that would show us that we can get 18 gigs of data from one side to the other at the same time.
Or if we had 3 highways with 6 lanes each,
yeah,
or 4 highways with 12 lanes each.
Exactly. So that's where, of course, our 24 gigs and our 48 gigs come into play for that distances, or for that amount of data.
And it's that simple. Do not use the word speed. Really does not refer to our world.
It doesn't, and in fact, bandwidth is the best and correct way to talk about when we're getting information from one side to the other.
Yes,
from one
the
place to
cable
another.
companies notwithstanding, the fastest speed of any internet provider.
So, and with that in mind, the relative use of the word speed does come into effect there because we're getting more information from one side to the other
sure, the
in
movie
less
loads
amount
faster.
of time. Less amount of time.
Right.
So, yeah, sure, it's fast because you're getting more stuff all at once. Now you
It's
could
just
still
a larger road.
correct. You could still get, you could still download a movie on a 10 meg internet service rather than a 1 gig internet service. It's just going to take
a long time.
much longer. And I know this by heart because I deal with it every day.
He lives in the country.
I do. All that to say, I think that pretty much covers everything that we wanted to talk about today. I think let's double check any questions. This Friday, we are going to be discussing Let's see.
Okay, now you and I have discussed this a lot. You not remembering this?
Pardon me, you put me on the spot. So on Friday, we are going to be discussing
And I know this one.
You do? Okay.
It's lens selection.
Lens selection, that's right. So we're going to be talking about lenses and cameras and how they work and how they correspond to picking the right one and how it works. And
are
we're
you
going to
pointing at a wall or are you pointing down the hallway?
Yeah, we'll be doing some
are
other
you
things
looking
with
at the
that as
tag
well.
of the car?
So definitely check in with us on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, same time as we did today, and we'll talk about that at that time. We'll talk about lenses and how they work and operate and all that kind of special stuff with that. So check in with us at that time. It'll be a great topic. I'm happy to talk about it. Hopefully, if everything works out, I placed the order for it, and I don't know if it's going to get here in time. We'll have a little pirate theme for us going on that day, so we'll see how that turns out. But all that to
one
say,
more thing before we go.
Oh, one more thing?
Yep. We're going to make sure everybody has
Go ahead. So you can always call us and email us. Of course, that's what Brent is writing out here for us today. Our phone number, best way to contact us by phone number is 386-492-8584. That's our tech support line. And of course, you can email me at adamr@metrohometheater.com, or you can email Brent at brentm@metrohometheater.com. If you have any questions, any show ideas, or anything else that you have in mind, definitely let us know what those are. Again, if you have questions about today's episode, you can either put them down in the comments or in the chat, and we can go back, and we always check back on those as well.
And if we miss something, let us know.
Yeah, exactly. So guys,
this really is for you guys, and
yeah,
not really for...
Well, we're just trying to get information out there for everybody, so that this is our tech tips for you today. So I am happy to see you here, and as always, thank you for checking in with us. Give us a like and a subscribe if we've helped you out today and giving some good information. And as Brent always says, definitely subscribe, like, and share on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, of course.
And what do they need to do?
Reboot often and early.
Thank you. I'm Brent.
I'm Adam.
We're out of here.
We'll see you next time.